Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. My guest today is Congressman Rodney Davis. Mr. Davis is the newly elected representative from the 13th Congressional District in Illinois. He represents a portion of the St. Louis Metro East area, including part of Collinsville, part of Maryville, Glen Carbon, Edwardsville, SIUE, northern parts of Alton and Godfrey, and from Metro East, his district runs eastward to Champaign County, including parts of 13 other counties. Prior to his election as a congressman, Mr. Davis served as projects director for Congressman John Shimkus. In that position, he learned how the federal government can be made to work for the people of Illinois. Congressman Davis is a member of the House Committee on Agriculture and the House Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure. Rodney Davis, welcome to Conversation.
Well, thanks for having me, Lee.
This is the first time that you've actually, I believe you sat over there when Congressman Shimkus was with us. Now you are sitting here in the big seat. So let's kind of do just an introduction to people of who you are and why you're a congressman.
Well, thank you. Well, let me tell you, too, it's a lot easier being in the seat over there, Monday morning quarterbacking what the person in this seat does, than it is sitting here answering questions. So I've learned that pretty quickly.
Well, we were talking before we went on camera, and I'm getting a pretty clear picture of what you're talking about. But go ahead and just talk about, you know, what it is that made you want to be in this seat instead of a support staff.
Well, many don't know my history. I mean, I haven't even been a candidate, let alone a member of Congress, for even an entire year yet. Just slightly less than a year ago, Tim Johnson, who was the incumbent member in this brand new district, decided to run in the Republican primary and then withdraw, which set off a series of public events that allowed me to secure the nomination on May 19th of last year and became a candidate for Congress. It's a surprise for me.
Let's be clear that people understand what you just said. Congressman Tim Johnson, who'd been a congressman for a number of years, ran in the primary as the Republican candidate for the district that you now represent. He won that primary, right?
Yes.
And then decided, I don't really want to be a congressman after all, and walked away, leaving the party without a candidate. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So now explain to the audience what happened from that moment forward.
So we went through a series of public forums, and I was selected by the county chairman in their nominating committee. On May 19th, I got a text while I was coaching my 11-year-old twin boys baseball game that I'd gotten the nomination. So, but me, the reason I'm running, the reason I even submitted my name was because we have to tackle this national debt. I have 3 kids at home. I have a 16-year-old daughter, and my boys, my twins I just mentioned, are 12 years old, and their share of this $16.7 trillion debt is over $50,000. And that's offensive to me as an American, and even more offensive to me as a father. We have to have people in Washington that are willing to make tough decisions and put this country back on the fiscal track that you and I know it can be.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to not just the $17 trillion debt that you were just alluding to, but also the over $100 trillion of promises that have been made by people who came before you in Congress to the American people for various forms of pensions and other transfer payments. Specifically, let's talk briefly, because we've only got a half hour here, about where we stand with funding Medicare and Social Security, which are interest to the people who do most of the voting in this country.
Right. Well, first of all, I was proud to support a budget plan put forth by the Republican majority a few months ago that balances our federal budget in 10 years. It also does not touch Medicare for those who are 55 and older. They have the exact same access to the exact same system that they have now. And what's great too is it still preserves that same system for future generations, and also gives generations like mine and my kids and my future grandchildren options besides the current system that helps prolong, to preserve and protect Medicare as we know it today. Because frankly, right now, if nothing's done, if you took a child to grade school and dropped him or her off in first grade, by the time that child graduates high school, Medicare will be insolvent if we do nothing. This plan that we put forth keeps Medicare for those seniors who love it and who use it and will not affect them at all. And it also keeps that plan available for that future generation. But you know what? The politics and the other parties are going to begin demagoguing this issue and try to say what's not true.
That plan did not pass then, or did pass the House? It
passed the House.
Okay, and then it went to the Senate, and what happened to it there?
Well, it hasn't been taken up in the Senate, but unlike the last 4 years, the Senate had to lay their cards on the table this year too. Why? Because we voted to take away their pay if they didn't. I mean, what a novel idea. They hadn't passed a budget in 4 years. That's their vision for America's future. They just punted it, and they decided to play politics. Well, amazing what happens when you threaten their pay and they pass their budget. Their budget never balances, ever. But that's their vision for America. That's the Senate and the Democrat vision for America. Our vision for America balances in 10 years. But now we're able to compare. And hopefully what's going to happen is we're going to be able to come up with some good common sense solutions like we saw when Congress used to govern. Congress used to govern back in the 90s. Remember when Bill Clinton and Newt Gingrich, they couldn't even figure out where to sit on Air Force One. They didn't like each other. But they sat around a table and they came up with good solutions, and we then saw the result of that with the Balanced Budget Agreement of 1997. Congress needs to get back to what they call regular order that resulted in good plans like that, and I think we're on track.
Okay, although if you were to look at the newspapers, you wouldn't necessarily believe that was the case. I hope, because you're there on a regular basis, I hope that is the case. In your district, in that race that you talked about, where you weren't even a candidate who was running in the primary, you were facing a fellow by the name of Dr. David Gill.
Yes.
And the results of that race was the closest race for Congress in 2012?
Closest Republican victory in the nation.
Right, and you won by 1,002 votes.
1,002.
Right, and because of the political nature and the what I call political wars that are going on, here you are, this is May, you were just sworn in January, and already there is someone who has quit her day job to supposedly run for your seat, which is 2 years out, or actually a year and a half out. Is that correct?
Well, that's correct. And there are some other Democrats that are interested, and we'll let the Democrats, decide who my opponent's going to be through their primary process. But let me put it into perspective for you, Lee. I got elected on Tuesday, that election day in November. My opponent conceded via Facebook and Twitter on Friday after the election. The following Tuesday, I was in Washington a week after Election Day, and as I woke up Wednesday morning to go to meetings, I grabbed one of the political newspapers out in Washington and saw my name listed as one of the top 4 targets in the nation. That's how much of a break I had between campaigning and governing. I hadn't even been sworn in yet. We were at orientation. But that's what happens when you have so few seats that are drawn to be competitive seats like this. 50-50 seats that I think they represent the good, hard-working Midwestern values that you and I grew up with. And I think we're going to be able to go out and talk about the successes we're going to have in the next 2 years. And hopefully the voters will send me back to Washington as long as we live up to that.
Well, I'm concerned not about the fact that somebody's already declared, or maybe not declared, but has indicated that they're going to be running against you at the beginning of your term, but that there doesn't seem to be any sort of idea, okay, fine, you won, what can we do in order to improve the situation of the United States? It seems to me much more ego-driven than any sense of statesmanship.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's indicative of Washington as we know it today. I'm trying to send a different message. We're able to separate the two, the politics from governing. But I do agree with you. I think we need more statesmanship in Washington. We need folks who are worried about making the tough decisions that are going to be right for America now, and more importantly, right for America's future. Because what I don't want to do, Lee, is leave a legacy, the same legacy that you just talked about, where generations before me made decisions that are going to affect my children and my grandchildren's financial future.
Coming back to something that you said at the top, right now, this year again, here in 2013, which the fiscal year I think ends on September 30th, we're going to spend about $1 trillion more than we're going to be taking in. Again, and this has been going on for a number of years now, so I mean it's just one more in a string. And I just want to know what you, not what your colleagues, but what do you think that we need to do to change that situation of spending more than we're taking in?
Well, first of all,
because you know the people in your district, the ones who put you there, they aren't doing that unless they're on the road to bankruptcy.
No, you're absolutely right. And frankly, if America continues, America is on the road to bankruptcy. And that's why it has to stop. That's why we need to get back to what they call the regular appropriations process, the regular authorization process. Because what we've seen over the last few years are a continuation of continuing resolutions, which funds government at last year's level with a few tweaks. And what that does is it allows you to not have to make decisions. It allows politicians to not have to reprioritize the way Washington spends money. Right now, we've got to put America on a debt repayment plan. We have to go in and find ways to effectively reprioritize the way Washington spends so that we can actually cut back on the deficit. And that's what our budget does. Our budget lays out a vision for that. And that's why we need the American people to help us, help send people to Washington who are aware of the crushing national debt, because there is a huge difference between the Democrat vision for America's future and our vision for America's future. We have to begin to pass bills that cost less, have less, and look at America's financial future, number one.
Mm-hmm. As anybody who has run up their Visa bill or MasterCard or Discover know, that when it comes time to pay it back, especially if you're paying minimums or near minimums, the interest is what really eats up the money that you send into those companies, and very little of it is going back into the principal to reduce the debt. Right now, the United States government is spending something on the order of around almost $500 billion a year on interest debt service on that $17 trillion and growing. And that's at the current rates, which are closer to like 2 and 3%. What is going to happen when interest rates return to something normal, like 4, 5, or 6?
Yeah, well, that's what's going to that's going to be an economic issue that I hope we never have to get to. But you can remember, and I can remember, when 7-8% was a great interest rate.
Yes.
Now people don't even bat an eye when interest rates are down to 2.5 to get a mortgage. They're like, well, it's so low. That's got to change, because that goes back to economic security. It also goes back to where folks, I think, have a viewpoint in America where they become numb to some of the economic news that just a few years ago we would have been jumping up and down for. And that's what I think has to change in America. And I don't think it's changing with the Obama administration. I think we have more of this economic malaise, and what that's doing is holding capital back. It's holding capital from job creators who could invest in equipment, who could invest in inventory, and most importantly, invest in people and create jobs that they're not doing, because they don't know what their tax bill is going to look like with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. They don't know what their health care costs are going to be. They just keep seeing them rise. And that decision to actually employ somebody is pushed to the back burner. And that's what politicians have to think of. Politicians talk about job creation all the time, creating jobs here. Government doesn't create those jobs. But government right now is hindering the ability for those that do to actually employ people. And part of my job is to change that in Washington.
Up in North Dakota, they have unemployment of less than 3% now, because there is a huge, huge, huge pool of oil that has been discovered up there. Actually, the Bakken Basin was discovered many years ago, but it's really coming into production now, and people are flooding into that part of the United States. There's also other areas, including places like New York and Pennsylvania and Ohio, where shale oil is being drawn out in order to get more petroleum. And of course, we come to the Keystone Pipeline. So this is all by way of asking, what should America's energy policy, which we don't seem, well, let me rephrase that. There is a policy, but it doesn't seem to be holding prices down. What do you think that the policy of the United States should be in terms of how we develop energy, especially our petroleum?
Well, first of all, Americans should not be happy with gas prices as high as they are. This should not be the status quo, because America has the ability to be energy independent. And it's government and the rules and the regulatory environment that the Obama administration has created that I think is holding this back. Keystone's a prime example. If President Obama and the Democrats were really serious about creating jobs, he'd sign his signature on a piece of paper and allow the Keystone Pipeline to go through so that our trades and labor folks can be put back to work building that pipeline. You talk about North Dakota, historic low unemployment rates. You look at my district where we've had historic high unemployment rates, much higher than what the national and the state average are. And we can fix that by doing what you just said, by making America energy independent. Energy is our resource that we can help to actually fund some of the government programs that are necessary and in turn also begin to pay down that national debt. But it always gives me a chuckle in Washington when those who always want to spend more money because they haven't met a government program they don't like to fund are the same ones trying to kill the goose that laid the golden egg by stopping our ability to expand our energy resources and find more innovative ways to actually tap into them. They want to kill hydraulic fracturing, which has given us the energy and the economic boom that we've seen in places like North Dakota.
Yeah. Well, I just wonder how many of these folks that you're referring to understand the concept of wealth production and how increasing the wealth of the United States actually goes to making sure that the poor are better taken care of in the United States.
Well, you're absolutely right there, but there are some politicians in Washington that when you mention the word wealth, all they think of is how do we tax it? And that needs to stop. That needs to be part of our message of economic growth, which in turn helps people who may be unemployed right now through no fault of their own to get off that unemployment system of up to 99 weeks and get the training they need to be able to go get the job so that their families have the income security that they want. They don't want to be on unemployment. Most don't want to be out of work, but we need to allow them the opportunities to get the training they need and also allow them the opportunities to get better jobs. If you look where I come from in central Illinois in Christian County, it made a big impact on my life, and one of the main reasons I went into public policy and public service was watching our largest employer in the 90s shut down, Peabody Mine Number 10 in Kincaid, Illinois. Shut down because overnight, with a signature on a piece of paper with the Clean Air Act amendments, it became cheaper for the power company to ship coal in from out west via a train than it was to dig it out from underground, put it on an electric conveyor belt and burn it. My local economy in my hometown of Taylorville suffered greatly. We've recovered, but that still made a tremendous impact to me because many of my friends' families lost their jobs. That didn't have to happen.
I think you recognize, I know I recognize, that there are many, many millions of Americans that are hurting big time. Still, here, the crash started somewhere in 2008, and here it is 2013, and they're still hurting, still without a job, still need help from their neighbors. That brings us around to the food stamp program. You're on the Agricultural Committee.
I am.
As I understand it, the latest agricultural bill, actually the largest portion of that, in the spending of that bill, has to do with food stamps. Is that correct?
Yeah, a major portion of the Farm Bill is related to the food nutrition program.
And what else does the Farm Bill do for the American people?
Well, when most people hear the words Farm Bill, They think it's going to set agricultural policy for the next 5 to 6 years. Well, it does that, but it also includes the food nutrition programs, the SNAP programs, and others. And that gives us an opportunity to talk about, it gives me an opportunity right now to talk about setting the farm programs. I'm going to begin marking that bill up, my first ever markup process in helping to craft a bill from the committee level to the floor and hopefully into law. My priorities are to ensure that we strengthen our risk management programs here in the Midwest.
What does that mean?
That means strengthening crop insurance. Crop insurance is working right here in the Midwest. It's working for our farmers. Before we had crop insurance, what we would have is constant disaster assistance payments that were off budget. We see the benefits of crop insurance. We see it's working. It helped us get through the drought last year at less than half of what was originally estimated as indemnities in the crop insurance program. And
Who's the insurer in this? Is it the government, or is it private companies?
It's a public-private partnership, which I think we need to actually utilize more of. It allows the private companies to sell insurance at a subsidized rate, which allows our farmers to be able to have a more cost-effective measure of not being adversely affected by things like the drought last year. In the past, what would happen is if we had a drought like last year, the USDA would throw out an estimate of what the damages were, and Congress would go in and pass disaster assistance off budget. Now, I believe the federal government plays a role in disaster assistance, but when we can figure out a way to avoid having disaster assistance by putting in better programs like crop insurance, I think we need to do that.
Mm-hmm. When I was talking about food stamps before, there is a perception that Republicans are constantly looking for ways to, cut the budget, slim it down, and food stamps is being pointed to as an area of waste. But in fact, my point was that there are people who are really surviving in this country because they're able to get food stamp and other kind of assistance. And I think there has to be a better description by Republicans of what it is that they believe in and how to help the poor, so that they don't look like they're constantly always for the rich farmers,
right,
but they are also looking towards how are we going to get people who are currently unemployed back to where they are, so they're not needing assistance anymore. They want to stand on their own 2 feet. Most of the people I know.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There are some who really need that assistance, and we need to ensure that they have access to that assistance. We also have to ensure that the way our programs are set up require some type of work too, so that we don't create generation after generation of those who are getting benefits while others are working. And that's what we as policymakers have to make sure that we put forth that vision too. But you're right. We have to stop the bureaucracy from hindering families from making a decision to get the education, the training they need to get a job that's available. It's one of the main reasons I introduced the Opportunity Knocks Act. And what it does is it allows families the flexibility if they want to go back to school. If someone wants to go back to school and they're unemployed, they want to pay on their own dime to go get training, let's say biofuels training at SIUE, at the Corn to Ethanol Research Center. If they want to go pay that, they don't lose their unemployment benefits when they do. Because right now, through the antiquated bureaucracies that we have, an individual who may have been laid off wants to go get retrained, and they can't go through an antiquated WIA process to get approved. If they go back to school so that they can fill a job that's open, they have to choose between getting that education and training to get a job or keeping their unemployment benefits so that their family can eat. That is not American, and that is wrong, and I'm trying to change that.
I agree with what you just said. There have been many, many stories, and here we are, we're down to the last 5 minutes, believe it or not. But I have seen many stories in the press about people who, they get locked in to being on the system because the amount of assistance is just so large by comparison to what they would get if they tried to go off and actually, get a job on their own. And that also has to be looked at as to how to transition people. There was big progress that was made back in the 90s of getting people to transition, what was it called? Something.
Welfare to work.
There you go,
Yeah.
welfare to work. And we seem to have lost track of that somewhere out here with our war on terrorism.
Well, it wasn't just the war on terrorism. It's this administration has relaxed those work requirements, and I think we need to look at what worked in the 90s to ensure that we moved people off. And a lot of that had to do with not just setting the policies for the Food and Nutrition Program, Lee. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we grew our economy. There were better decisions in Washington that got government out of the way so that our economy and our job creators and those who are going to employ families and the hardworking taxpayers of this area, it allowed them the opportunity to invest in people. And that's what we need now. But I don't see it coming out of the White House.
Right. Well, I do see a lot of regulations coming out of the executive department of the United States government, and a couple of which, and I'm just going to cover these briefly because we're running out of time. One of which is that because they changed the definition of what the levies need to do or can do, Metro East is having to spend huge amounts of money in order to improve the levee system, which basically has been standing, I forget, for the last 60 years. The other is that because, as we talked about much earlier, water quality standards have been changed. MSD over in St. Louis County and City has now been forced by the federal courts to spend billions of dollars raising rates on people who can ill afford it. It used to be that the rates were like $12.50 a month. Now they're going to $25. Before you know it, it'll be $50, $60 a month for a sewer bill. Can you comment on those two items?
Well, first of all, it just seems absurd to me. Levee project's one I've worked with Congressman Shimkus on in my previous job. It just frustrates me that you have the Corps of Engineers and FEMA basically fighting a deadline to see who gets there faster to cost taxpayers of the Metro East more. I got to give Les Sturman and the folks at the levee district a lot of credit, and we're working with them to make sure that we come up with some solutions. I'm going to be discussing the Water Resource and Development Act reauthorization on my committee, the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, and we're going to take their recommendations and hopefully allow the Corps to change some policies. But we also have to make sure that FEMA has the same specifications in each region. It seems to me from my own experience that what happens in certain FEMA regions may not happen in other regions the same way, and I think that needs to be part of the discussion too.
Les Sturman has sat right there in that chair and has mentioned these very things you talk about, but one of the things that he's mentioned either on the air or off the air with me, and we're down to our last 30 seconds here, is that he's really frustrated that he can't get any answers or any decisions out of the Corps of Engineers.
That's a frustration I had for 16 years working with them when I worked for Congressman Shimkus. That's why I would encourage Les, and I know Les has had folks come chat with us, work with us, especially with the word of reauthorization. This is where we can make some changes and really have a positive impact together.
Thank you very much for your time. I certainly appreciate your coming and visiting with us. I hope that we'll see you again and again over the years.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lee, for having me.
And to my audience, I've been speaking with Congressman Rodney Davis. He's the new congressman from the Illinois 13th. One of the things I want to say to the audience is that it makes a real difference who sits in these seats. You need to take the time to find out who is going to do the best by you for your family. Thank you very much.